Let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaming and everything in its orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get it started.
Well, I figured today, Tim, you and I were talking about this, the experience of having been a lurker and then actually taking the plunge and becoming a gainer. I've kind of shared a bit of my own story in the past. I kind of feel like I always was a gainer. Like, I don't feel like I lurked for long, if at all, before knowing that I wanted to gain. I think I just discovered the community and went, oh, I want to get fat. Like, it wasn't like I lurked and then kind of had that realization. But you yourself have expressed a sense of having been a lurker, right?
Yeah. When I first discovered the online gaming community, I was very much a lurker.
So, speaking of that, like, how did you discover the gainer community originally?
I was 18 and I was on the internet and I was horny because I was young, dumb, and full of cum. So I was, I don't think we had Google back then. I think we only had what did we have? Ask Jeeves and Yahoo. So I was typing in fat man porn, chubby guy porn, and stuff like that. And that was back when they used to have web rings, and multiple sites could be attached to a web ring, and you would just go and you'd cycle through all of them. And I think I was on some chubby porn site and landed on, it must have been either Belly Builders or Gainer Web. Can't remember which one came first. But that's when I found oh my God, there are men out there that are intentionally getting fat and posting their pictures. And this was back before the idea of me getting fat myself had ever crossed my mind. I just knew that I was into this. And I started going to those sites every day and watching people post their progress pics. But I was not comfortable enough to put myself out there in any kind of way. I just wanted to observe. I was not at a point where I wanted to actually go out and put my stuff out there.
Interesting. So obviously there was an understanding before you came across gaining that you were attracted to larger guys. You probably identified an attraction to bears, chubs, and bulls. I suppose that's the other category of
got all those labels.
I'm a giraffe.
Gay men and we're on our labels. I swear to God, I don't know why this seems to be exclusively a gay man thing, but we just love to label everything.
Yeah, we do.
I heard someone say dolphin one time, and I'm like, well, what the fuck is a dolphin? And they're like, well, it's a muscular gay man who shaves all of his hair off. And I'm like, that's stupid. What? Seriously, it had to be a dolphin?
What about a man who has a penis that goes down to his knees? Does that make him an aardvark? What?
I have no idea.
I don't know.
But give it enough time, there will be a label like that.
But circling back, so you could identify that there was a specific attraction towards larger guys. And when did that come out for you? Was that always there?
Oh, that was as far back as I can remember. I mean, obviously before puberty, it wasn't a sexual thing. It's not like I was a 5-year-old with an erection or anything. No, but I remember always being entranced by it, very fascinated by it, wanting to see more of it. We referenced all those cartoon shows that we watched when we were kids, that kind of thing, where a character would become spontaneously chubby or go on an eating binge and gain a lot of weight. All that stuff was just being stored in my head. And then puberty hits and all the gears start turning and the switches come on, and I'm like, oh, it's more than just fascination. I'm actually getting off to this, So that's been lifelong.
So when you discovered Belly Builders, Gainer Web, that was the first time that you'd come across the concept of someone is getting fat intentionally, right?
Yeah. And, it's one of those aha moments where the light bulb goes off and you're like, oh my God, I'm not alone. I'm not the only person that's into this. There are more people who are into this. Oh my God, there are people who post pictures. Holy shit. I can look at, and so, typical night for me about the age of 18 or 19, I'm planted in front of a computer at 2 o'clock in the morning when everyone's asleep, with a bottle of lotion beside me and some tissues, and I'm just going to town.
Having a good time. You know, if I ever find the power to travel back in time, I'm going to find your 18-year-old address. I'm going to stand outside the window and play a simple refrain on my phone that young you may only hear enough to be like, that was probably a song playing in the back of my mind. But it's the Tigger song from Winnie the Pooh at the end where he says, I'm the only one. And then I'm going to whisper, but you're not the only one. Sorry, Tigger, not the only one.
Well, we talk a lot about how when you're younger, how isolating it can feel to know that you're into this kind of thing and not aware that there's a community out there. And when I was 18, that was 2001. So the online presence of gaming was not what it is today. You really, really had to hunt for stuff back then. And, to think like if I were 18 today and discovering the Grokio apps, or discovering Belly Builders as it is now, or the Instagram gaming community, like doors would have just been busted open. Like I probably would not have been nearly as timid or shy about sharing my own self in today's what word am I looking for, in today's community.
Yeah, it is interesting to reflect on, the state of things even 10 years ago, and thinking, gosh, things really felt so developed then, but now you look back on how things were and it's like, oh God, kids today, they do genuinely have it so much easier. It makes me curious to ask, do you feel like that lack of community is perhaps what kind of fueled an element of the lurking to an extent?
Yeah, because I do remember back then, I'm sure that other gamers were talking to each other. That had to have been happening. And I'm sure that they were meeting up and, you forming small groups of friends and whatnot. But it wasn't the kind of thing that it is today, like say on Instagram, where the community does, people go on live stream, they talk to each other. You can have 4 people in the chat. You can meet people from all over the planet. It didn't feel like that back then.
Right. I mean, that makes sense. And I don't know, I think Lurker is about the only label in the gainer community that invokes eye roll.
Yeah.
Because you think about it, are you a gainer, a maintainer, an encourager, feeder, feedy, pig, bloater, stuffer, patter, inflator, lurker? Ugh, everyone just goes, what? Because
I guess lurker carries the pejorative because it's seen as like possibly cowardly.
Yeah.
That you're not putting yourself out there in any type of way. You're not even putting an image of yourself out there.
Now, that is a point to be made, because in order to be known in any kind of digital space, you have to present some form of character. So whether that's on DeviantArt as some kind of content creator, or on Tumblr as a content creator, or on Grommr /Instagram /any other platform within gaming, you post photos of yourself to create a character that people identify with. Lurkers don't invest. Lurkers rarely have a picture up, let alone any full content of their own. So I suppose there is something to be said with lurkers, especially lurkers that live nearby. Have you ever had that experience of going online and you see like blank profile viewed you, less than a mile away, and you are just looking around being like, who are you? Who are you? Because you think to yourself, oh, if you only just viewed your profile, like I was outside walking around the park, you were at the park at the same time as me. That's why you looked at my profile, because you were at the park and you saw me and you went, oh, is that so-and-so? And then you went and looked at me. So you're someone in my local area being smart on people and looking at me. And then that, like, it is a little bit uncomfortable, because it's like, they know you.
Well, I remember I had this experience one time where somebody messaged me on Grommr, and they were a local and they didn't have anything on their profile. And all the message was like, I saw you out last night at the bar. I really like your belly. And I replied with, well, I really wish that you had come up and said something to me. You know, you could have said hello, you could have introduced yourself. I understand that like social anxiety is a big problem for a lot of people. I guess it's been so long since I've had that problem that it's hard for me to identify with now. But like I mean, I don't think I'm an intimidating person by any means. I just wish that person, whoever they were, and I never did find out because they never messaged back, um, had the bravery to come up and just say hello and maybe make a friend or something. But I I realize that the majority of lurking is probably due to that social anxiety, that idea of who am I to talk to this person? What if they reject me? What if they're not interested? What if if I actually go up and start talking to a gainer, that's me admitting that I'm into this and that I have to now face the reality of what I'm really into. I feel like it's a lot of that situation.
Well, I mean, I've made this statement a number of times. It surprises me to no end how often I am the first gainer that somebody meets. And I don't think of myself in any kind of massive sense, either in terms of popularity or physical dimensions. And yet, I'm often baby's first gainer. And I have to ask myself why. But probably a willingness and an openness to meet new people and kind of leave things ambiguous and open, the quote unquote see what happens when you just catch up for a coffee and have an opportunity to normalize it. So, how long was it between when you discovered the gainer community and when you transitioned from lurker to gainer? How long was that?
It was a slow transition, and there was another step in between because so from like 18 to about 23 or 24, I was solely um just like the lurking. I didn't have any pictures posted or anything like that because as we've discussed many times before, the skinny encourager is often the invisible person in the room, and I didn't feel that I had anything to offer in terms of people like would want to see. So then I started watching people bloat on Yahoo Instant Messenger because you could do the cam to cam thing, and I did it with a few bloaters, and I realized, oh well, I can just do that because I'm not putting on any weight, but I'm making my belly look bigger. And I was posting pictures of me with a bloated belly, and I was a bloater, quote unquote, for a while. And that lasted until I was about 26 or 27, when weight actually started to stick. I was approaching 30, weight was coming on. I was by no means fat, by no means whatsoever. I was just starting to get a little bit of love handles. I was starting to get softer around the middle, but still, very like what society would call a skinny guy.
Yeah.
And I started posting pictures of that, and I started getting responses from people like, oh, are you going to keep getting bigger? Like you look so hot if you kept getting fatter, blah, blah, blah. And because, and I've talked about my toxic marriage before, because I was in the middle of a toxic marriage, I did not take the plunge because I didn't think that my husband was going to like it. And he was already putting me down for having this fetish. And he was already making me feel like I was undesirable because I was not fitting the body type of the kind of people that he was cheating on me with. So, yeah, didn't actually take the full plunge and become a full-fledged gainer until after I broke up with him.
So, how long was it then between when you first discovered the community and became a bloater? How long did that take?
So from 18, like 23. So discovered the community at 18, became a bloater at 23.
So about 5 years. What were those experiences like, if any, that you had interacting with other members of the community?
Well, specifically when I was a lurker, I would reach out and sometimes I would compliment some of the more well-known gainers at the time. But because I wasn't really presenting anything of myself, I was often ignored. And if I wasn't outright ignored, I was told, or I would be asked, well, what's your stats? And when I typed in 5'10", 123 pounds, they were like, oh yeah, no, sorry.
I mean, I think that's also reminiscent of like the priority that does exist in the community. Obviously, it is a community centered on fatness, on growth. Yes, we want a preference to people who are larger, but we've talked about this before, both on live streams and on the podcast. There is an understanding of why there's that focus and its importance to keep it that way. But also, there's something to be said about the way in which thinness and people who are thin, whether they are encouragers, admirers, non-gainers, or baby gainers just starting out, there is something to be said about the way in which we treat those individuals. And a discussion should be had about ways in which we can improve on that as a community.
I agree.
And you've spoken a little bit about, the things that at the time made you apprehensive to really take the plunge. So you'd started out with bloating. Tell me again, what was that moment when you decided to take the plunge from bloating into gaining?
Well, like I said, weight was starting to come on anyway. And I've always had this fetish, always. And, like in the time period where my marriage was about to come to an end, I was really getting fed up with kind of everything. I was getting fed up with the way that he was treating me. And just outside of him, I was getting fed up with society's beauty standards. I was tired of being looked at like, how old? I would have been over 30 at this point. I've been about 32. And I was already considered past my prime in the gay community. I was already getting looked at askance as like, the twunk, which I hate that word. And I was just like, fuck it. I don't know how to articulate this properly because I honestly didn't even get turned on by my own weight gain until just recently. So prior to being turned on by my own weight gain, I just knew that I wanted to be different. I knew I wanted to be more bearish. And I knew there were certain things that were never going to happen. I was never going to grow more body hair. I was never going to be able to grow a full beard, but I could at least control weight. So yeah, and then when I finally kicked my ex out, I was like, this is it. I'm going for it. We're doing it. I have nothing else to lose. I have nothing to be afraid of. I've been through every form of abuse you can go through. Let's just do it,
Do you feel, having had that experience of being a lurker, is there a validity to it that we're not seeing? Because again, from the perspective of someone who never lurked, I came into the community knowing what I wanted to do. I rocked up on the first day, went to student orientation. They said, you can decide whether you want to go to Kappa Kappa Gamma or Kappa Gamma Kappa or Gamma Gamma Kappa or Gamma Kappa Gamma or Yamma 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 Yamma. And I went, oh yeah, Gainer. That sounds like it. Going that way. So do you feel like there is a validity to it that we don't see?
Well, I mean, I'm sure that there are individuals out there in the community who only want to live this kind of lifestyle in a fantasy setting, like they may not ever want to actually meet up with somebody else. They may only want to correspond through messages. Maybe they might talk on the phone. Maybe they might even do a little bit of video chatting, but they just don't want their image out there, either because they're shy, socially awkward. Maybe they have a kind of job that really does not lend itself to allowing themselves that kind of freedom. I know that people tend to get judgmental of lurkers, but I feel like we kind of need to evolve our point of view on that and just be like, look, it's different for everybody. And all members of the community are valid, even if you never see what they look like or you never speak to them. They're still a part of this tribe. And if this is what works for them, we should let them have it.
Yeah, there's I can see reasons why someone would lurk. I can see reasons why someone would distance themselves. I can see reasons why someone would have that. I think certainly it's only been since doing this podcast and having American contributors that I've learned that the rules in America are so severe that if someone ousts you, that's not seen as an act of sexual violence. That's seen as an employer's right to go, right, well, you're fired because you're a freak. Period. End of story. So understanding that, I'm like, oh, that makes a bit more sense.
Yeah.
And, there are also things to be said about people who work in education, people who work with university students who, of course, are horny and sexual beings. They see their tutor, they see their teacher on a website, they interact with them, it becomes awkward, it becomes a problem, then there's the courts involved. I can see the reasons. And, I think something that we seem to come back to on this podcast quite a bit is reminding ourselves that there's more to the story of each experience in this community than just I dislike it or I like it, therefore it's valid or invalid, full stop.
Mhm.
There is more to the story. And I think you're right. Maybe there is more that needs to be given to lurkers in that sense. I certainly think, you know, if there was a setup that allowed for more structured role play or something that allowed for people who they just want to lurk, they just want to engage in a particular context and they could just have that, I think that would be I think
Well,
that
and maybe we even need to revamp the terminology because, again, like gay men loving to label everything, maybe we shouldn't call them lurkers because lurker is pejorative. It denotes a person who's sneaky. It denotes a person who maybe has an ulterior motive. So maybe it should be something as bland as like non-participating member of the community or non-part or something that, if you want to shorten it. Like I think that we should probably try and attach a less negative label to their experience.
maybe something like punter, like someone who sits in the grandstands, punter.
Oh, okay. I didn't get the reference.
Or like I'm thinking like crowd, like viewer, like grandstand, like
Fan,
a fan.
voyeur. Like voyeur, I don't think has it. Well, I suppose that
Mm.
does have a slightly negative connotation to it, but it's also a subgenre of porn. So, like,
Maybe just fan.
yeah, fan.
Maybe just
Well, but fan may denote that they are, I guess, more like they're a fan of someone specific. I mean, I'm trying to think of a word that would mean that they are a fan of the community, but not necessarily like a single person. Um, and I
we'll,
had a word at the tip of my tongue, and now it's escaped. So I'll have to try to see if I can circle around back to it.
we'll have a think. Listeners, if you have any suggestions, please send them in. So, to ask maybe a bit of a dumb question here, what is the difference between your experience as a lurker, as a bloater, and now as a gainer?
So as a lurker, very little to no interaction. As a bloater, I was getting attention, and there were people who wanted me to bloat on camera for them, which I would do. And I have to say again, I know I've said this before, but short PSA, bloating is very dangerous. So if you're going to do it, please be very careful because I didn't know it at the time that I was doing it, and I could have water poisoned myself. So
Oh yeah,
I'm saying exercise caution if you are going to bloat specifically with water because you can get water toxicity. If you're going to bloat with alcohol, certainly don't give yourself alcohol poisoning. Just be careful with bloating. Anytime that you're inflating an internal organ with something, it can be dangerous. So,
true
but
that.
yeah, I would do that for people on camera. And then finally, when I went full hog and came out of the pantry and was like, I am a gainer, here I am, so much more communal experiences, talking to people. And, I'll say specifically on Instagram and the gaming community there, really getting to know people because Grommr, though it is lovely and I'm glad it exists, it's not the most conducive to actually talking to people and getting to know them.
So, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like it's not just a change in the things that you're doing. It sounds like there is an increase in social engagement. It sounds like there is an increase in pleasure, both social and sexual, that you had from said engagements. It sounds like as you came into your own, you understood that it was more a fulfillment of yourself and an authenticity to do the gaining rather than to go simply to bloating. Um, I wondered to myself, to an extent, if it could be comparable to bisexuality in that sense. People often treat bisexuality as the gateway, as a stepping stone. I'm
Mm.
straight, no, I'm bisexual, actually, I'm gay. And sometimes that can seem to denote that bisexuality is transient, it's invalid, it's just an excuse someone has to either be straight and dibble dabble experiment and waste everyone's time, or they're actually gay and just pussyfooting around about actually owning their sexuality. And maybe there's not that level of severity when it comes to being a bloater,
Yeah,
but
I would
some
say there's more
people,
nuance to that
yeah,
than
like I
that. That
think some people would just be bloaters in the end, and maybe that's where they're happy to be. Maybe they're not destined to be gainers. Maybe it's not their goal to become gainers. Maybe to simply go into being a bloater is the full fulfillment rather than seen as a halfway.
Yeah.
That's more the comparison I think I was trying to go for there.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak to anyone else's experience. That's how it was for me. But there are people on Instagram in the gaming community that do only just bloating, and they're perfectly happy doing it. So yeah, for me that was the case, but certainly not the rule.
What advice, first of all, do you have for what advice do you have for people who are in that in-between phase? People who are starting to dip their toe and they're maybe considering gaining, but they haven't really fully committed to it. Maybe they call themselves bloaters, stuffers, padders, inflators. Maybe they don't even give themselves a label. Maybe they're just trialing it and they're not too sure about taking the plunge. What advice do you have for that group of people?
Well, I mean, I think you can go at your own pace now, like honestly, because when I think back to when I first got into the community, there kind of was less of a gray area. It seemed a lot more black and white. You had to define what you were. If you were an encourager, you tended to be skinny. If you were a gainer, you were obviously trying to get fatter. If you were a bloater, that's all you did. Like there was just very clear. It seemed like back then there were more strict labels. Now it seems like it's all kind of gray area, because while I am a gainer, I could also become a maintainer. I can also switch up and become an encourager. If I'm out at the bar one night and I've had some beers, technically that makes me a bloater too. So when it comes to if you are a person who does not participate, if that's where you're comfortable and you don't want to step out of that comfort zone, I understand. So you could stay there. But if you'd like to take a risk, just go with whatever feels right to you. You certainly do not have to be defined by the community itself. You get to define who you are. So whatever form that takes, I just say, experiment a little bit. You can ease into it. You can see if you like it. If you don't like it, you don't have to. There's no rules that say that you have to like anything. So yeah, that's pretty much what I would say is just be as authentically you as you can, and whatever works, go with it. Whatever makes you happy, I should say, whatever makes you happy, go with it.
And, to that point, what advice would you give for lurkers who are considering making some form of a plunge but haven't worked it out yet?
Well, try reaching out to people, talk to them. I know that in itself can be very intimidating, because like I used to think, who am I to reach out to someone who's well known and popular? Like they don't know who I am. I'm just this person. They know nothing about me. But I feel by and large, most gainers are nice people. Like most of us are nice people. We're not like dickheads that are just going to like shoot you down and be like, why are you talking to me? Yes, you will run into people like that. They do exist, and that's unfortunate. But like for the most part, I think a lot of us would take the time to talk to you and ask you questions like, okay, well, how are you feeling? Like, what do you think you want for your own body? What are you really into? What could you possibly see happening to yourself? That's a great resource. Beyond that, just look around the community and see what tickles your fancy, and if there's a particular thing that you're really into, give it a try. I cite my beta puppy a lot, because he it's like every new thing that he discovers he really gets into, and it opens up doors for him, and all of a sudden there's this whole new world that he gets to explore. And I think you also have to be, in your heart, you have to be open to those experiences. And so cliche, but I just say that, follow your heart.
And maybe as a last question, if we were to take this out, like, because I imagine gaining and the community like layers, like a ring, with gainers, muscle gainers, active feeders, encouragers are kind of in the center. You take a step backwards, you're looking at the maintainers, the admirers, maybe the more casual participants. A step back from that, you've got the lurkers, the people who are just kind of on the fringe. And then a step back from that again, you've got civilians. You've got people who are actually just outside of the whole concept, really.
Mhm.
And, you know, kind of following on this theme of, you know, moving backwards each time, what advice would you give to civilians listening to this podcast who maybe, because they're listening, they now have an idea that we exist? Maybe they have some preconceived notions. Maybe they don't know what to do with that. And maybe they are considering taking a step to learning more, whether that means understanding their own identity better, or whether it means just finding out more about it. What advice would you give to those people?
Well, not to shamelessly plug our own product, but our podcast has been pretty damn good at covering a myriad of topics that it could be a potentially great resource for you just to learn about it if that's all you're interested in. You know, you can go back and listen to the entire back catalog. We've covered a lot of stuff. And I'm sure that somewhere in all of that, you can find some advice or some information that would be helpful to you. You know, if you're totally outside the fetish and this is the first time you're learning about it, the only thing that I ever plead from anybody is just don't be judgmental. Just be respectful that people have kinks. You know, if you scratch the surface of anyone, you're going to find a kink. They're there. Whether people admit to them or not, everyone's got one. And if you ever feel like you want to judge someone else's kink, and I'm only talking about kink, like I will say this, like, if a kink is not illegal, like if your kink doesn't break the law, and if your kink doesn't hurt anybody else physically, emotionally, or mentally, don't judge someone else's kink, you know? Just be respectful of it, because how would you feel if someone was judging your kink? If someone said, oh my God, I can't believe you're into that. That's so weird. That's so gross. I can't believe that's just, what's wrong with you? Would you want to experience that? No. And we don't want to experience it either. We just want to, you know, we just want to be, oh, okay, that's what you're into. Cool. No problems.
When straight people come to a gay bar, like, I understand when women do it, it's like, oh, I can go here. Men aren't going to try to trigger warning rape me here. Cool, I can just dance and have a good time and let my hair down. Sure, cool, great. But also, you're in a queer space and you need to not be homophobic, you need to not be transphobic, you need to not be queerphobic, biphobic, you need to not be an asshole, you need to not be bringing your straight bullshit into the club. So respect that. You're in our space. We've given you permission to enter and share in the greatness that we have. Just be respectful of that. And I suppose that would also be my want for anyone listening to this who's considering exploring more of the community. Don't be a cunt. So it's all.
Yeah, it's very simple. Just be nice, because we'll be nice to you in return. Like,
whenever you listen to this, it's currently 2022, which means you know that we're dealing with this whole Ukraine-Russia war. COVID is still a thing. Restrictions are easing and not everyone's vaxxed. There's just a lot of shit happening in the world right now, and I'm tired, and I do not have the energy for truly anyone's bullshit. So please just don't. Like, do something else with your day. Do some gardening.
Read a book.
Do that.
Have a wank. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Ease the tension.
Just do something, for fuck's sake. Christ almighty. But that brings us to the end of our episode today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave a good review. If you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram at @stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at thiccradio. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by stannnum and thiccradio.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lurker.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify.